Ignore her. She's just the housekeeper's daughter. Nobody important. My stepmother Veronica waved her hand dismissively in my direction while addressing a table of investors who held the future of her beloved company in their checkbooks. But when the lead investor, a silver-haired woman named Margaret Holloway, looked down at the contract in front of her, then slowly raised her eyes to meet mine, the temperature in that boardroom dropped 20 degrees. "Mrs. Chambers," Margaret said, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade, "according to this document, the woman you just dismissed as nobody important owns 51% of Chambers luxury brands. Which means this meeting can't proceed without her approval, and frankly, after what I just witnessed, I'm not sure I want it to." Before I tell you how I became the majority owner of my stepmother's company without her knowledge, and why I waited 12 years to reveal the truth at the exact moment it would hurt the most, take a moment to subscribe and comment below where you're watching from. This story might just change how you see family secrets, patient revenge, and the power of a woman who has underestimated her entire life. My name is Catalina Reyes Chambers. Most people just call me Kat. I'm 34 years old, and until 3 months ago, I had spent my entire adult life being invisible in my own family. Let me start from the beginning, the real beginning. My mother, Isabella Reyes, came to the United States from Mexico when she was 19 years old. She had nothing but a high school education, fierce determination, and a dream of building a better life. She worked her way up from cleaning houses to managing a small staff of housekeepers, and eventually landed a position as the head housekeeper for one of the wealthiest families in Boston, the Chambers family. That's where she met my father. William Chambers III was the only son of a shipping magnate, heir to a fortune built over 3 generations of strategic investments and ruthless business decisions. He was 32 when my mother started working at the estate, handsome and charming in that old money way that makes everything seem effortless, the expensive education, the designer clothes, the confidence that comes from never having worried about money a day in your life. He was also engaged to Veronica Ashworth, a socialite whose family had nearly as much money as his own, a match that had been arranged by their parents when they were practically children. But William fell in love with my mother. It started slowly, so slowly that neither of them recognized what was happening until it was too late. Conversations in the kitchen while my mother prepared breakfast, her English still accented, but improving every day. Walks in the garden when Veronica was away at her endless charity luncheons and spa appointments. Moments stolen when no one was watching, when they could be just 2 people instead of a wealthy heir and his housekeeper. My mother tried to resist. She was smart enough to know that the relationship was impossible, that his world would never accept her, that falling for him could only end in heartbreak. She tried to transfer to another position in the household, tried to limit their interactions, tried to remind herself that she was in America to build a career, not to have her heart broken by a man who could never truly be hers. But love doesn't care about social class or practical considerations. It doesn't care about prenuptial agreements or family expectations or the vast gulf between the people who own estates and the people who clean them. Within 6 months, they were secretly seeing each other, meeting in borrowed apartments and out-of-the-way restaurants where nobody would recognize William Chambers III. Within a year, my mother was pregnant with me. She didn't tell him at first. She was terrified of his reaction, of what it would mean, of the choices that would have to be made. But my father noticed the changes, the morning sickness she tried to hide, the way her hand sometimes drifted to her stomach, and he confronted her gently, with more love than fear. "I'll take care of you," he promised. "Both of you, no matter what." But promises made in private rarely survive contact with the real world. When Veronica found out about the affair, she was furious, but not for the reasons you might expect. She didn't care that William had been unfaithful. Their engagement was more of a business arrangement than a love match anyway. What she cared about was the scandal. A Chambers heir having a child with the help? It would be the gossip of the decade. A deal was made. My mother would leave the estate quietly, accepting a settlement that would allow her to raise me comfortably. William would marry Veronica as planned and never publicly acknowledge me as his daughter. In exchange, my mother would sign documents agreeing to keep the relationship secret. My mother signed because She had no choice. She was an immigrant with no connections, no power, no way to fight one of the wealthiest families on the East Coast. She took the money and disappeared. But my father, to his credit, and against everything Veronica demanded, refused to abandon me entirely. He set up a trust fund in my name, managed by a lawyer who reported only to him. He arranged for my mother to receive monthly payments that ensured we never struggled financially. He paid for my private school education, my college tuition, everything I needed to build a life. And once a month, without fail, he visited us. Those visits were the highlight of my childhood, the events I counted down to on my calendar, the moments that made me feel like I mattered even when the rest of the world seemed designed to tell me otherwise. My father would arrive at our small apartment in a working-class neighborhood, dressed down in jeans and a polo shirt so he wouldn't attract attention, driving a rental car instead of the Mercedes that would have looked out of place on our street. He'd bring books, always books, stacks of them that he'd chosen specifically for me. Novels and histories and science books that open windows onto worlds I'd never seen. He'd bring games we could play together, puzzles that challenged my mind, art supplies when I went through my painting phase, and chemistry sets when I became obsessed with science. Most importantly, he brought himself, his time, his attention, his love. He'd help with my homework, patiently explaining algebra concepts that made no sense to me, quizzing me on vocabulary words for English class, listening to me read aloud from whatever book I was working through. He'd ask about my friends, wanting to know their names and their stories, genuinely interested in the small dramas of my elementary school life. He'd tell me about history and business, and the way the world worked, preparing me for a future he couldn't openly help me reach. "You're smart, Kat," he'd tell me, using the nickname only he and my mother used. "Smarter than most people I know who have every advantage. Don't ever let anyone make you feel small." He never called himself my father in public. He never introduced me to his other family, the family he had with Veronica, the son they had together, the life he led in the big house on the hill while we lived in our little apartment. He never brought me to the estate or included me in holidays or acknowledged to the world that I existed. But in private, he loved me. In the small hours we shared, in the books he chose and the conversations we had, and the way his eyes lit up when I understood something complicated for the first time. In all of that, I never doubted that I was his daughter and that he loved me. When I was 12, my mother sat me down and explained everything, the affair, the deal, the reason why my father could never be fully part of our lives. I was devastated at first, angry at the unfairness of it all. But my mother helped me understand. "Your father is trapped," she said in her gentle, accented English. "He made choices before you were born that he cannot undo. But he has never stopped loving you, Mija. Never." I learned to accept the situation. I learned to love my father in the limited ways he was available to me. And I learned very early that the world was not fair, especially for people like us. When I was 16, my father did something unexpected. He showed up at our apartment one evening, looking pale and worried. My mother made him coffee while I watched from the doorway, sensing that something important was happening. "I need to tell you both something," he said. "I've been diagnosed with a heart condition. The doctors say I could have years, or I could have months. There's no way to know." My mother's hand went to her mouth. I felt the floor tilt beneath my feet. "I've been thinking about what happens after I'm gone," he continued. "Veronica will inherit most of the estate. That was arranged in our prenuptial agreement. But I've spent the last 16 years building something on the side. Something she doesn't know about." He pulled out a folder of documents. "Chambers Luxury Brands," he said. "I started it 12 years ago as a side project, a line of high-end home goods and accessories. Veronica thinks it's just a hobby, a small investment that barely turns a profit. But I've been building it carefully, quietly, using holding companies and silent partnerships. It's worth nearly $40 million now." My mother and I stared at him in shock. "I've structured the company so that 51% is held in a trust that lists Catalina as the sole beneficiary." He looked at me, his eyes filled with something I'd never seen before: desperation. "When I die, you'll be the majority owner. Veronica will own 49%, which she thinks is the whole thing. She has no idea about the trust, no idea about you. Why? I managed to ask. Why didn't you just give everything to us openly? Because Veronica would have found a way to destroy it, he said simply. She's been trying to take control of my finances for years. If she knew about the trust, she'd challenge it in court, claim I was mentally incompetent or that I'd been manipulated. This way, everything is protected. The trust is ironclad. By the time she finds out, it'll be too late. He reached across the table and took my hand. This company is my gift to you, Catalina. Not just the money, though that will give you security for the rest of your life, but the power. When you're ready, you can reveal yourself. You can take your place at the table. You can show the world who you really are. I was 16 years old. I didn't fully understand what he was giving me, but I understood that my father was trying, in the only way he could, to make things right. My father lived for another 6 years. His heart condition worsened gradually, and I spent as much time with him as I could without arousing Veronica's suspicion. We talked about the company, about business strategies, about what I would do when the time came. He made me promise not to reveal myself until I was ready, not just legally, but emotionally. Don't do it out of anger, he said. Do it when you're strong enough to win. He died when I was 22, peacefully, in his sleep. I wasn't allowed to attend the funeral. Veronica made sure of that. For the next 12 years, I watched from the shadows. I earned a business degree from Boston University, graduating summa cum laude while working 2 jobs to pay for the expenses my father's trust fund didn't cover. I wanted to prove I could succeed on my own merits, not just because my father had left me money. I wanted to earn my place in the world. After graduation, I worked my way up at a consulting firm, starting as a junior analyst and eventually becoming a senior associate specializing in corporate turnarounds. I learned everything I could about retail strategy, brand management, supply chain optimization, and the 1,000 small decisions that separate successful companies from failures. I studied case studies of legendary turnarounds and analyzed the patterns of what worked and what didn't. Every skill I developed with Chambers luxury brands in mind. Every late night at the office, every difficult client, every crisis I helped navigate, I treated it all as training for the day when I would finally claim what my father had left me. I studied Chambers luxury brands obsessively, its products, its finances, its market position, its competitive landscape. I subscribed to industry newsletters and monitored news coverage and set up Google alerts for every mention of the brand. I knew more about that company than most of the people who actually worked there, and I never let on that I had any connection to it whatsoever. And I watched Veronica run the company into the ground. My father had built something beautiful. He'd focused on quality, craftsmanship, timeless design, products that cost more because they were genuinely worth the price. He sourced materials from the best suppliers, hired artisans who took pride in their work, and built a brand reputation that made wealthy customers willing to wait months for a single handbag or piece of furniture. Under his leadership, the company had grown steadily, building a loyal customer base among people who appreciated excellence and were willing to pay for it. Veronica didn't understand any of that. She had no background in business, no instinct for quality, no appreciation for the careful balance that sustained a luxury brand. She saw the company as a status symbol, a vanity project, a way to put her name on things and feel important. She appeared in magazine profiles as the creative visionary behind Chambers luxury brands when she'd never designed anything in her life. She threw lavish launch parties that cost more than they generated in sales. She treated employees like servants rather than partners, driving away talented people who could have helped the brand thrive. The decisions she made were catastrophic. She cut corners on materials to increase profit margins, switching from Italian leather to cheaper alternatives that looked similar but wore poorly. She fired experienced craftspeople, artisans who'd been with the company since my father's day, and replaced them with cheaper labor that couldn't maintain the same quality standards. She expanded too quickly into markets she didn't understand, launching product lines in categories where the brand had no credibility, diluting what had once been a focused excellence into mediocre attempts at everything. I watched the reviews change. Products that had once earned 5 stars now earned 3, then 2. Customers who had been loyal for decades started looking elsewhere. Fashion magazines that had praised the brand's quality began publishing critical pieces about its decline. Within 5 years of my father's death, Chambers Luxury Brands was hemorrhaging money. Within 8, it was barely staying afloat, sustained by credit lines and loans that Veronica kept taking out to cover previous debts. Within 10, it was a shell of what it had been, the $40 million company my father had built, now worth maybe $15 million, and that was being generous. I could have intervened at any time. The trust gave me control the moment my father died. I could have revealed my ownership, fired Veronica, taken the reins, and saved the company before she destroyed it completely. But I waited. My father had told me to act when I was strong enough to win. And I wasn't strong enough yet. I needed Veronica to dig herself into a hole so deep she couldn't climb out without my help. 3 months ago, that moment finally arrived. Chambers Luxury Brands was on the verge of bankruptcy. Veronica had spent years making promises she couldn't keep, taking loans she couldn't repay, and alienating every investor who'd ever believed in the company. She was desperate enough to do something she'd never done before, bring in outside investors. The investor group was led by Margaret Holloway, a legendary figure in the retail industry. She'd turned around dozens of struggling brands, and she had a reputation for being ruthless but fair. If she invested in Chambers Luxury Brands, it would be saved. If she didn't, the company would collapse within 6 months. The meeting was scheduled for a Wednesday afternoon at the company's headquarters, a building I'd never been inside but knew intimately from floor plans and photographs. I arrived early, dressed in a simple but elegant black dress, and took a seat in the lobby like any other visitor. When Veronica swept in with her entourage, she didn't recognize me. Why would she? The last time she'd seen me, I was a baby. She'd made sure I stayed invisible for 34 years. But I recognized her. The perfectly styled blonde hair, the designer suit, the way she carried herself like the world owed her something. She looked older than I expected. Stress and disappointment had etched themselves into her face, but she was still unmistakably the woman who had erased me from my father's life. "Excuse me," she said, barely glancing in my direction as she passed. "The investor meeting is private. You'll need to wait in the lobby." "Actually," I said calmly, "I'm here for the meeting." She stopped, turning to look at me properly for the first time. Her eyes narrowed with suspicion. "And you are Catalina Reyes." I didn't add the Chambers. "Not yet. I have a stake in the company." Veronica laughed, a sharp, dismissive sound. "I don't think so, sweetheart. I know every shareholder, and there's no Catalina Reyes on my list. You must be confused. I assure you I'm not." She studied me for a moment, taking in my features that, if she'd looked closely, bore an unmistakable resemblance to my father. But Veronica didn't look closely. She saw my Hispanic surname, my mother's dark hair and brown skin, and made her assumptions. "Wait," she said slowly, her lip curling. "You're the housekeeper's daughter, aren't you? Isabella's girl?" The words hit me like a slap, even though I'd been expecting them. The housekeeper's daughter. As if that was all I could ever be. My mother's name was Isabella, yes. I remember now. William's little indiscretion. She shook her head, almost amused. "I don't know how you found out about this meeting or what you think you're doing here, but you need to leave. This is a business discussion. There's nothing here for you." "I disagree." Her eyes flashed with annoyance. "Security." "Mrs. Chambers." A new voice interrupted us. Margaret Holloway had entered the lobby, flanked by 2 associates carrying briefcases. "I believe we're ready to begin?" Veronica's demeanor shifted instantly, the gracious hostess replacing the cold dismissal. "Of course, Miss Holloway. Please come this way. The conference room is prepared." As she led the investors toward the elevator, I followed. Veronica turned, her smile frozen in place. "I'm sorry, but this meeting is—" "Ms. Reyes is welcome to join us," Margaret said smoothly. "We received documentation this morning indicating that she has a significant interest in the company. We'd like her perspective." I had sent that documentation myself. Margaret Holloway was known for doing her homework, and I'd made sure she had all the information she needed, including the existence of a trust that owned 51% of Chambers' luxury brands. Veronica's smile didn't waver, but I saw the confusion in her eyes. She didn't know what Margaret was talking about. She had no idea what was coming. "Of course," she said through clenched teeth. "The more the merrier." The conference room was exactly what I expected. Expensive furniture, dramatic city views, the kind of environment designed to impress investors and intimidate competitors. Veronica took her seat at the head of the table, flanked by her lawyers and accountants. I sat at the opposite end, alone. Margaret and her team arranged themselves in the middle, the contracts and documents spread before them. "Before we begin," Margaret said, "I'd like to clarify the ownership structure. Our due diligence revealed some complications." Complications? Veronica's voice was honey-sweet, but I could hear the edge underneath. "I assure you, the ownership is quite straightforward. I inherited the company from my late husband. It's been mine for 12 years. That's not entirely accurate, according to these documents." Margaret slid a folder across the table. "Perhaps you could explain the Reyes Trust?" The color drained from Veronica's face. I don't know what that is." "It's a trust established by William Chambers 22 years ago. It holds 51% of Chambers' luxury brands." Margaret turned to me. "And according to the trust documents, Ms. Reyes here is the sole beneficiary." The silence in that room was deafening. Veronica's lawyers scrambled for the folder, flipping through pages, their expressions growing more alarmed with each document they reviewed. I watched them discover what I'd known for 18 years. My father had outsmarted all of them. "This is impossible," Veronica finally managed. "William never. He couldn't have." "The trust was established through a series of holding companies," I said, speaking for the first time since we'd entered the room. "My father was very careful. He knew you'd try to contest it if you found out, so he made sure you never would. At least not until after his death, when the trust became irrevocable." "Your father?" Veronica's voice was barely a whisper. "William Chambers III. I'm his daughter. The one you tried to erase." For a long moment, nobody moved. The only sound was the soft hum of the building's climate control system and the distant noise of traffic far below. Then Veronica did something I didn't expect. She laughed. It was a brittle sound, desperate and defensive, the laugh of someone who can't accept what's happening so they pretend it's a joke. "This is absurd," she said, turning to Margaret with manufactured confidence. "This woman is clearly delusional. She's the child of our former housekeeper, some affair my husband had decades ago, if it even happened at all. She has no legitimate claim to anything. These documents are obviously forged. They've been authenticated by 3 separate legal firms," Margaret said coolly, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd done this kind of due diligence hundreds of times. "Including Harrison and Walsh, which your own husband used for other matters. The trust documents are genuine, the chain of custody is clear, and the ownership transfer happened automatically upon Mr. Chambers' death." "Even if they were genuine," Veronica pressed on, her voice rising slightly, "she can't just walk in here and claim ownership. There are procedures, legal challenges, notification requirements. This will take years to sort out in court." "Actually, it won't." I pulled out my own folder, one I'd been carrying for months, filled with documentation I'd assembled with the help of the best estate attorneys in the state. I had the trust reviewed by my attorneys 6 years ago. Every potential challenge has already been considered and addressed. We've mapped out every possible legal argument you could make and prepare responses to all of them. I spread the documents across the table. The trust was established in compliance with all applicable laws. The holding companies were properly structured. The ownership transfer triggered automatically upon my father's death, exactly as he intended. I've been the majority shareholder of this company for 12 years. Then why? Veronica's voice cracked, the composure she'd maintained for 30 years finally showing fissures. Why are you only showing up now? I let the question hang in the air for a moment, savoring it. This was the moment I'd imagined for so long, the confrontation I'd rehearsed in my mind 1,000 times. But now that it was here, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt something closer to sad. "Because I wanted to see what you would do with what my father built," I said finally. He spent 12 years creating something beautiful, a company that stood for quality, for craftsmanship, for excellence. And you? I gestured at the financial reports scattered across the table. You turned it into this. 15 million in debt. A brand reputation in shambles. Customers who wouldn't buy your products if they were the last items on earth. I did my best. You did what was easiest. You cut corners. You chased short-term profits. You cared more about putting your name on things than about whether those things were worth buying. I leaned forward. My father gave you 49% of his company. Do you know why? Because he didn't trust you with the whole thing. He knew exactly who you were. Veronica's face had gone from pale to red, humiliation and rage fighting for dominance. You can't do this, she said. I'll fight you in court. You'll what? Spend money you don't have on lawyers you can't afford to fight a legal battle you can't win. I shook my head. The documents are ironclad, Veronica. My father made sure of that. You're not getting rid of me the way you got rid of my mother. Margaret Holloway had been watching our exchange with undisguised fascination. Now she cleared her throat. I think we need to pause this meeting and reassess. Ms. Reyes, as the majority shareholder, do you have a position on the proposed investment? I turned to face her, grateful for the opportunity to shift from personal warfare to business. I do. But before I share it, I'd like to ask you something, Ms. Holloway. When you came here today, what did you expect to find? Margaret considered the question carefully. A struggling company with potential. Good bones, as they say, but poor management. We'd planned to invest on the condition that we could install our own leadership team. And now, knowing what you know about the ownership situation, now I'm intrigued. She smiled slightly. I've done my research on you, Ms. Reyes. Business degree from BU, 8 years at McKinsey Consulting. Specialized in retail turnarounds. She raised an eyebrow. You're not just the housekeeper's daughter. You're exactly the kind of person who could save this company. Veronica made a strangled sound of protest, but Margaret ignored her. I'm prepared to invest, Margaret continued, but only if you're at the helm. Not Mrs. Chambers. I felt a surge of triumph, but I kept my expression neutral. I accept. On one condition. Name it. Mrs. Chambers retains her 49% stake, but she has no operational control. She can collect dividends when we return to profitability, but she doesn't set foot in this building, doesn't make decisions, doesn't speak to the media on behalf of the company. I looked at Veronica, who was trembling with suppressed fury. She becomes what she always wanted me to be, invisible. The negotiations lasted another 3 hours. By the end, the deal was structured. Margaret's firm would invest $15 million, I would become CEO, and Veronica would be reduced to a silent partner with no authority. When the papers were signed and the investors had left, I found myself alone in the conference room with Veronica. She looked shattered, her perfect composure cracked, her certainty dissolved. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. You planned this, she said hoarsely. For years. You waited for me to fail so you could swoop in and take everything. I waited for you to show the world who you really were. I corrected. The failing was your choice. You had 12 years to prove my father wrong about you. 12 years to build something worth being proud of. Instead, you proved him right. He should never have left you anything. You're not. I wasn't what? Legitimate? Important? Worthy? I gathered my things, preparing to leave. My father thought differently. And apparently so do the people who actually matter in this industry. I paused at the door, turning back one last time. You called me the housekeeper's daughter. You meant it as an insult. But my mother was the hardest working, most honorable person I've ever known. She came to this country with nothing and built a life through sheer determination. She raised me to be strong, to be patient, to know my worth even when the world tried to tell me I had none. I straightened my shoulders. I am the housekeeper's daughter. And I'm also William Chambers's daughter. And now I'm the CEO of the company he built. The one you nearly destroyed. I smiled. I think I'll keep all three. The first year of my leadership was brutal. I had to undo a decade of damage, rebuilding supplier relationships that Veronica had poisoned with late payments and unreasonable demands, rehiring talented craftspeople who'd sworn they'd never work for Chambers again, convincing customers that the brand was worth trusting after years of declining quality. I worked 100-hour weeks, sleeping in my office more nights than I slept at home. I made painful decisions, laying off people who'd been loyal to Veronica but had no skills to contribute, closing product lines that had never made sense, shutting down the vanity projects that had drained resources without building value. Some days I wondered if I'd made a mistake. The company was in worse shape than even my research had suggested, with hidden debts and pending lawsuits that only emerged once I had access to the real books. There were moments when bankruptcy seemed like the only option, when I lay awake at night wondering if my father's company would die on my watch. But I kept going. I'd spent 12 years preparing for this. I wasn't going to give up in year one. The turnaround started with the basics. I went back to my father's original vision: quality materials, skilled craftsmanship, timeless design. I found the suppliers he'd originally worked with, the ones Veronica had abandoned for cheaper alternatives, and negotiated new contracts. I tracked down former artisans who'd left when the quality standards dropped and convinced them to return, promising that things would be different under my leadership. I also modernized what needed modernizing. My father had been brilliant, but he built the company for a pre-digital world. I invested in e-commerce, social media marketing, and data analytics that helped us understand our customers better than we ever had before. I hired young designers who understood contemporary aesthetics, but respected the brand's heritage. Slowly, things began to turn around. The new products we launched were met with critical acclaim. Industry publications called it "return to form" and the resurrection of a sleeping giant. Fashion editors who'd written off the brand started featuring our pieces again. Influencers who shaped luxury consumer behavior began posting about the new Chambers with genuine enthusiasm. Sales climbed steadily. The debt shrank. Within 3 years, Chambers Luxury Brands was profitable again. Really profitable, not the creative accounting that had hidden Veronica's failures for so long. Today, 5 years after that boardroom confrontation, the company is worth nearly $100 million, more than double what it was worth at its peak under my father's leadership. We've expanded thoughtfully into new markets and new categories, always staying true to the values my father built the brand on: quality, craftsmanship, timeless design. We've won awards. We've been featured in case studies at business schools. We've become the example people cite when they talk about successful turnarounds in the luxury space. And through it all, I've tried to remember why I'm doing this. Not for revenge against Veronica, though I'd be lying if I said that wasn't satisfying. Not for the money, though financial security is nice after growing up watching my mother count pennies. But for my father, who believed in me when no one else did. And for my mother, who sacrificed so much to give me a chance. Margaret Holloway remains on the board, and she's become something of a mentor to me. I've seen a lot of turnarounds, she told me recently, but I've never seen anyone do it with as much grace as you. Your father would be proud. I think about him often, about the choices he made, the secrets he kept, the complicated legacy he left behind. He wasn't perfect. He couldn't give me the normal childhood I deserved, couldn't publicly acknowledge me as his daughter, couldn't stand up to Veronica the way I wish he had. But he gave me what he could. He loved me in the ways he was able. And in the end, he found a way to give me not just financial security, but the power to claim my own place in the world. My mother passed away 2 years ago, peacefully, in the house I bought for her after taking over the company. She never wanted anything extravagant, just a comfortable home with a garden where she could grow vegetables like she had in Mexico as a girl. On her nightstand, she kept a photograph of her and my father, taken during one of his secret visits when I was young. They're laughing in the picture, looking at each other with an affection that transcends their impossible circumstances. I keep that photograph in my office now. Veronica still owns her 49%, and the dividends she receives are substantial, more than enough to maintain her lifestyle. I offered to buy her out once, but she refused. I think holding on to those shares is her way of pretending she still matters.
We don't speak.
I see her occasionally at industry events, always surrounded by people who don't know the truth, still playing the role of the elegant widow of William Chambers III. She never acknowledges me, and I extend her the same courtesy. Some wounds are too deep to heal. Some relationships were never real, to begin with. Last month, a business magazine featured me on their cover. The comeback queen, they called me. The article told the story of how I'd turned around a failing luxury brand, but it didn't tell the whole story. It couldn't. Some things are too personal for headlines. But they did ask me one question that I answered honestly. What advice would you give to someone who feels like they don't belong in the rooms they want to be in? I thought about my mother cleaning houses to give me a better life. I thought about my father loving me in secret because he didn't have the courage to love me openly. I thought about Veronica trying to dismiss me as nobody important in front of the people who would decide the future of her company. And I said, the rooms don't get to decide if you belong. You do. Walk in like you own the place because sometimes you actually might. My stepmother told the investors I was just the housekeeper's daughter. Then they read my name on the contract, and everything she'd spent 30 years believing about worth and belonging crumbled in a single afternoon. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe and comment below where you're watching from. I'd love to know how many people have been underestimated because of where they came from and proved everyone wrong. And remember, your origins don't determine your destination. The people who dismiss you today might be working for you tomorrow. This is Catalina Reyes Chambers, and this is my truth.